Cosmic rebellion. She's the princess, he's the soldier, their love forges empires. The war had been raging for so long that Marcus Hale had almost forgotten what silence felt like. The human soldier crouched among the broken ruins of an abandoned city on the fringe of the Orion Arm, the air thick with dust and the acrid stench of plasma burns, every wall pockmarked by the signatures of battle, and above him, in the distant blackness of space, star fleets clashed in endless firestorms, humanity fighting desperately against the might of empires they barely understood, his rifle heavy in his arms and his heart heavier still with the knowledge that they were losing, always losing, for every world held today was another to burn tomorrow, and yet he fought because soldiers fight when there is no choice left, because home meant something even when it was billions of light years away, and in that moment when the explosions finally subsided and the smoke rolled back, when Marcus found himself cut off from his unit and alone, he stumbled into a crumbling palace courtyard, where the night sky glimmered above shattered domes of alien glass, and that was where he saw her, the alien princess who would one day change everything, standing tall despite the devastation around her, her gown torn, her crown dented, her hands smeared with blood not her own, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light that seemed to hold galaxies within them, and for a brief second Marcus thought she was some hallucination conjured by exhaustion, until she spoke, her voice steady but trembling. At its edges, a voice both commanding and pleading, "Human soldier, lower your weapon. I am Princess Liara of the Veari, and if you kill me now, you kill the last chance of peace your people will ever have." Marcus's instincts screamed to distrust, for the Veari were enemies, their fleets had burned colonies and slaughtered innocents, but there was something in her words, something in her posture, something that told him she was not the architect of this destruction but another victim caught in its gears, and when he noticed the burns across her arms, the bruises hidden beneath her regal bearing, he realized she too had been hunted, not by his kind but by her own, betrayed in a rebellion that sought to topple her family's throne and seize control of an empire, and for a long moment, neither moved, two warriors of opposite worlds staring across broken stone, until the distant thunder of armored walkers forced a choice, and Marcus, against every order drilled into him, reached out his hand and pulled her into cover, whispering sharply that if she wanted to live she had better keep quiet, and so began the strangest alliance of the war, a lone human soldier and an alien princess. Huddled together in shadows, pursued by those who called her traitor and him prey, their escape from the ruined city marked by near misses with patrols, firefights in alleys, and the growing tension of two beings bound not by trust but by necessity, and yet as hours turned to days as Marcus discovered Liara's knowledge of safe paths, secret codes, and the hidden fractures of her people's empire, he realized she was more than just a figurehead in exile, she was a spark, one that could ignite rebellion across galaxies if placed in the right hands, and Liara in turn began to see in Marcus something her kind had never valued in humans, a stubborn resilience, a refusal to break even when the world fell apart, and though his words were few, his actions spoke with unshakable clarity, every time he shielded her from fire, every time he offered her the last of his rations, every time he chose to stand his ground when retreat might have been safer, and in those moments of shared peril, something began to shift, a fragile thread forming between them, born in silence but woven with trust, until one night, huddled in the skeletal remains of an ancient observatory, Liara confessed in whispers that the rebellion tearing her people apart was not just political but personal, that she had been promised to a warlord who now sought her throne through force, and her refusal had branded her an obstacle to be erased, her only hope of survival lying in the unlikeliest of alliances, with a human, a species her empire had dismissed as primitive, and Marcus, staring at the flickering stars through the broken dome above, felt the weight of her words not just as a soldier but as a man who understood what it meant to be disposable in someone else's war, and in that quiet exchange as the universe spun cold and indifferent around them, the seed of something dangerous took root, not just alliance, not just survival, but the beginning of a bond that would one day forge empires, though neither of them yet dared to name it. The journey beyond the ruined city tested Marcus Hale and Princess Liara in ways neither could have predicted. For though the soldier had known hardship in trenches carved into barren moons and sieges where hunger gnawed worse than any enemy fire, nothing had prepared him for the responsibility of carrying not just his own life but the fragile hope of a dethroned heir whose survival meant more than she let herself admit, and as they moved across landscapes scarred by war, charred forests where the trees burned without end, deserts littered with wrecks of starfighters still smoldering with the ghosts of their pilots, and orbital debris falling in silent streaks like false shooting stars, Marcus felt the enormity of her burden press upon him, for everywhere they went, whispers spread like sparks in dry grass, whispers that the princess yet lived, that the Empire's rightful bloodline still breathed, that perhaps there remained a chance to rise against the warlords who sought only conquest, and with each village they passed, each desperate band of refugees that bowed before Liara or begged her for guidance, Marcus saw her steel herself, her regal bearing flickering through exhaustion, her words spoken with a calm he knew cost her dearly, for she was not only surviving, she was already leading, even in exile, her very presence inspiring the broken to hope. And yet behind that strength he saw her falter in moments when she thought no one was watching, her hands trembling as she tried to stitch wounds of the dying, her eyes wet when children asked when their fathers would return from battles she knew they had lost, and though Marcus had been trained to remain detached, to view alien suffering as collateral in a war not his to pity, something inside him cracked, for the princess was no longer just a symbol, she was flesh and blood and courage and vulnerability wrapped into one, and against his instincts, against the unyielding armor of discipline, he found himself caring. Their bond deepened not in grand declarations but in the small silences between crises, in the way she leaned against him when exhaustion claimed her legs, in the way he adjusted his pace to match hers even when urgency demanded speed, in the way she trusted him to keep watch while she slept in ruins where any noise could bring death, and though Marcus fought to tell himself this was duty alone, he knew duty did not explain the quickening of his pulse when her hand brushed his in the dark, nor the quiet ache he felt when she pulled away too quickly, as though she too feared the consequences of a closeness neither had chosen yet both could no longer deny. The rebellion swelled in the background like a rising storm, with reports filtering in through smugglers and sympathizers that fleets were moving, that cities loyal to the Queen's bloodline were staging uprisings, that the warlord Karath, the very one who had once been promised her hand, was tightening his grip with brutal efficiency, slaughtering civilians and burning archives to erase her legacy. And Marcus understood with growing clarity that he had become more than her guardian. He was her witness, the human who carried her truth when the galaxy tried to bury it, and when emissaries from a fractured Veari faction at last intercepted them, their leader kneeling before Liara in the dust of a ravaged plain, Marcus realized what it meant to stand beside her, for though they addressed her as Your Highness, their wary glances turned to him, the human soldier who walked at her side, their suspicion sharpened by generations of distrust. And in that moment he understood the paradox of his place. He was both bridge and barrier, proof of her alliance with the other, the outsider, and yet a constant reminder that she had leaned on one not of her blood. Tensions grew as they joined a hidden camp where the rebellion organized, leaders bickering in tents lit by fading lanterns, voices raised in languages Marcus could not understand, yet every heated debate ended with eyes on Liara, the princess forced to mediate between warlords and senators, priests and generals, her presence both blessing and curse, for to follow her meant uniting, but to follow her meant risking everything under the shadow of her name, and Marcus, watching from the edges, saw the weight crush her in ways battle never could, the loneliness of command that no crown could ease, and in her exhaustion, she sought him not for counsel in politics but for the human honesty he gave without agenda, his bluntness and anchor when her own people drowned her in ceremony. One night, after a council splintered into shouting matches and accusations, she slipped into the quiet of the camp's perimeter where Marcus stood guard, her shoulders slumping, her crown discarded, her voice a whisper trembling with weariness as she confessed she feared not only losing the rebellion but losing herself to the role forced upon her, that sometimes she longed to simply be Liara, a woman who could laugh, who could breathe, who could exist without every choice carrying the fate of billions, and Marcus, staring into the alien stars above, told her he did not know how to heal galaxies, but he knew how to stand beside someone when the world fell apart, and when she reached for his hand in that silence, neither spoke, but both knew something irrevocable had shifted. Their closeness became both shield and weapon, for soon the camp's whispers spread faster than strategy, rumors that the human soldier and the princess shared more than duty, some viewing it as betrayal of their bloodline, others as a symbol of the very unity the rebellion claimed to fight for, and Marcus realized the peril of what they had become, that their bond, still fragile and unnamed, had become political, weaponized by allies and enemies alike. Yet even knowing this, neither could sever it, for in stolen moments between battles, in the way her gaze lingered on him when she thought none were looking, in the way his heart steadied only when he knew she was near, they had already chosen, whether or not they admitted it aloud. The rebellion gathered strength, victories carved into the void at terrible cost, but with each world that rose in Liara's name, with each fleet that rallied to her banner, Marcus saw the empire reshaping itself not just through politics but through love that burned quietly yet fiercely between them, a love still unspoken yet undeniable, and though war raged on every horizon, he began to believe what had once seemed impossible, that perhaps their bond could forge something greater than empires. Of conquest, that perhaps it could forge a future. The rebellion reached its crescendo like a tidal wave crashing against the bulwarks of tyranny, and Marcus Hale, once just a soldier lost on foreign soil, now stood at the very heart of a movement that stretched across stars, his fate bound to Princess Liara's in ways he could no longer untangle, their journey from hunted fugitives to leaders of an uprising marked by blood, sacrifice, and the kind of bond that no longer needed words to prove its strength, for where she stood, he stood, and where he fought, she fought with him, not with weapons always, but with the fire of her voice that carried through fleets and cities, igniting hope in those who had long surrendered to despair. And yet as the armies of rebellion gathered, as banners bearing the sigil of the Veari royal line were raised again across worlds once conquered, the shadow of Karath loomed greater than ever, his fleets blackening space with their sheer number, his cruelty burning brighter in massacres designed to break their spirit, and the final confrontation could not be delayed. The rebellion would either rise victorious or be extinguished in a single stroke, and so it was decided, a strike at the capital world of Vaer itself, a place Marcus had never imagined he would see, the jewel of the Empire, now a fortress twisted under the warlord's iron fist. The battle was unlike anything he had ever known, armadas clashing in skies so thick with fire that even the stars seemed drowned, the ground shaking with every bombardment, and Marcus, standing in the command chamber beside Liara, saw not just soldiers but entire civilizations throwing themselves into the fire for the promise she represented. Her calm unwavering even as reports of losses flooded in, her voice steady as she issued orders that balanced courage with compassion, and though fear gnawed at Marcus's chest, he drew strength from her presence, the way her eyes shone not with arrogance but with a belief so pure it silenced doubt, and when at last the chance came, when intelligence revealed that Karath himself commanded from the palace throne room, Marcus knew what must be done. They could not topple him with fleets alone, not while he wielded the symbol of the throne, and so, side by side, he and Liara descended into the heart of the storm, infiltrating the palace through corridors littered with wreckage, every step echoing with ghosts of history. The confrontation with Karath was inevitable, and when it came, it was with the fury of decades of ambition, the warlord towering in his blackened armor, his voice dripping contempt as he mocked Liara for clinging to ideals of peace, mocked her for dragging a human at her side as if such weakness could forge strength, and the duel that followed was not merely of blades and strength but of wills, Marcus fighting with every ounce of skill the battlefield had carved into him, Liara matching Karatha's strikes with her own defiance, and together they pushed against him, not as two warriors but as one, their rhythms seamless, their movements bound by trust and something deeper, until at last Karath fell, his roar silenced, his empire of cruelty collapsing in the moment his body struck the floor, and in the silence that followed, Liara turned not to the throne but to Marcus, her crown hanging heavy in her hands, her voice breaking as she whispered that this seat of power, this symbol of all her people's history, meant nothing unless shared, that peace demanded not only unity of fleets but unity of hearts, and as the Council of Rebellion and the watching world held their breath, she declared before all that her throne would not stand unless a human shared it, that Marcus Hale, the soldier who had saved her life and stood beside her through exile and fire, would stand beside her as sovereign, not as conqueror nor as ornament, but as equal, and though Marcus's first instinct was to refuse, to say he was no king, no emperor, no ruler of peoples, the look in her eyes stilled him, for in them he saw not politics nor power but the simple truth of a woman who had chosen, and he realized that his love for her was not only his own but the bridge upon which two galaxies could walk, and so he accepted, not with a grand speech but with the quiet strength of his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining before billions of watching eyes. What followed was not immediate peace nor simple unity, for rebuilding from ashes never is, but it was the beginning of something no empire had ever forged, a rule not built upon bloodlines alone, but upon the choice of two souls who had found each other in war and dared to love across every divide. And as years passed, as Marcus and Liara sat upon the twin thrones, their bond tested by politics, by enemies old and new, by the endless weight of leadership they endured because theirs was not a love born of luxury but of survival, not a union of convenience but of fire, and when history would speak of them, it would not call them conquerors nor rulers, but the ones who forged empires in love, and though Marcus would never forget the soldier he once was, nor Liara the princess hunted through ruins, they both understood that together they had become something greater, not legends, not myths, but living proof that love, even between a human soldier and an alien princess, could change the course of stars.